Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Kennedy's Mosaic Insurance Crawford Company workshop on cyber and data notification. We're so glad that all of you can join us here today, and we're hopefully going to see a few more people come and listen to what we have to say, what this esteemed panel have to say. So your moderator for this afternoon is none other than Kelsey Evans, associate from Kennedy's in Dubai. She's here with Amal Al Raisi, associate from Kennedy's Oman, based here in Muscat. There's Rob Stora from Mosaic Insurance, come over from Dubai to put his expertise and knowledge into the mix. There's Jamie G as well from Crawford Company, and the one and only Ollie Dent, head of cyber for Kennedy's in the Middle East and Europe. So no further ado, I'm going to hand you over to moderator Kelsey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. So hello everyone and welcome to today's session. As Jamie mentioned, my name is Kelsey Evans and I'm associate from Kennedy's Global Cyber and Data Privacy team, and I'm based in the Dubai office. And my role today is to moderate a panel discussion between these four cyber and data privacy experts. And the purpose of today's discussion is to discuss the latest cyber trends, types of cyber incidents, and different extortion tactics by threat actors. Secondly, to raise awareness of how to plan effectively for a cyber incident and what happens when you don't plan effectively for a cyber incident. And thirdly, to explain the importance and benefits of cyber insurance and incident response teams. We can also have questions at the end if anyone has anything to ask. But before we dive into this discussion, I'm just going to pose it over to the panel. If you could just explain a little bit more about why you're on this panel today.
Hello everyone, my name is Amal Al Raisi. I'm from Kennedy's Muscat. I'm here today to explain more about the requirements and legal landscape in relation to the Middle East.
Hello everyone, and thank you. My name is Rob Stora. I'm VP for Cyber in the Middle East for Mosaic Insurance. I'm here today to explain from an insurer's perspective the importance of buying cyber insurance in this market.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie G, Regional Cyber Lead from Crawford Company. We are effectively an insurance claim solutions provider. So if there's an incident, we help your insurers get through that.
Afternoon everyone, so my name's Ollie Dent. I'm a partner at Kennedy's, and as Jamie said, I head up the team across the Middle East and into Europe as well. So my team specialises in responding to cyber incidents. We've dealt with some of the largest incidents in the cyber market. So last year we dealt with an incident that affected an international sportswear company, as an example, and that affected over 206 countries and jurisdictions globally, which required an international response. So we've got a team of experts across the world to deal with cyber incidents. So we help project manage those incidents for the company. We bring on board other experts, such as forensic experts, PR experts, and we bring all that together and advise the company as to the best way out of that incident. So hand back to Kelsey.
Thank you everyone for those helpful introductions. Now, moving on to our session, I think a good place to start would be to describe what trends we are seeing currently in the cyber market today. And perhaps we can expand a little bit also on the threat actors and different types of cyber incidents that we are seeing. So maybe Ollie and then Jamie, you could give us a brief overview.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kelsey. So to start with a bit of context as to what we're going to discuss during this panel discussion, we're going to start with some stats. So within the Kennedy's cyber team, we've dealt with a lot of incidents. So the last 3 years, we've seen a real increase in the number of cyber attacks that are facing companies. So back to 2020, we saw about 179 incidents that we dealt with within our team. That rose exponentially into 2021. And then into 2022, last year, we dealt with 674 incidents. That's growing again this year. We're on track to exceed 1,000 incidents, we think, over the course of this year if the trend continues. So we've got a lot of experience in dealing with every type of incident, from an SME level right the way through to international organizations. So just to break that down into the types of incident that we see, the vast majority of what we're seeing at the moment in the team is ransomware. And we're going to be discussing ransomware quite a lot in the session this afternoon. It's obviously a very hot topic on a lot of people's minds at the moment. So that represents about 56% of the incidents that we deal with. About 34% of the incidents that we see are business email compromise, usually resulting in some form of payment diversion. About 16% are more traditional human error incidents. So think laptops left on trains, papers disclosed to the wrong party. And a small percentage, but an important percentage of the incidents that we see relate to website compromises. So let's just drill down into those incidents a little bit more, with a bit more detail. So first of all, website compromise. These sort of incidents are notoriously complex and tricky to deal with. Whilst they represent the smallest percentage of the incidents that we see, they're actually often present the biggest exposure to a company. So what I'm talking about here is incidents where the code base of a website has been compromised in some way that results in the threat actors being able to skim the credit card details from the payment card page of that website. It's a sophisticated tool that the threat actors use, and it's very sophisticated and surreptitious in nature. It's very difficult to spot. We dealt with an incident last year which was a jewelry company that sells their products in various international locations. And they recognized on Black Friday last year, of all days, that their website was under attack. And when we looked at the code, the logs showed that code had been on their website for over a year, skimming off all of their customers' data over that period. So that caused a huge exposure for that company, and we dealt with the cleanup of that. In terms of what that means to the company, there are regulatory obligations to comply with in multiple jurisdictions when a company like that sells to so many different locations. But there are also payment card industry standard regulations as well, which are very, very onerous and can lead to huge losses in terms of fines, and the PCI industry can stop that company from processing payment card details on their website. So that can lead to business interruption losses as well. They also usually require some form of tool to be provided to the companies to the customers, that are impacted by the incident. The regulators like to see companies offering things like credit monitoring tools, dark web monitoring tools that help their customers protect themselves from the impact of the incident. Those tools cost quite a lot of money, up to $50, $60 per person, per customer. So, once you start to do the math on that, it can really rack up very, very quickly. So these sort of incidents, as I say, can be very, very damaging to the company and their reputation. Human error. So again, these sort of incidents can be very small in nature, a single email going to the wrong place, or they can be extremely devastating. We've dealt with incidents where some very sensitive spreadsheets containing details of employees that nobody would want to be exposed to the outside world have been sent to the wrong place, that have been then shared online or shared between a population of employees. And that can cause huge reputational losses and damage to the organization. We also see other types of human error incidents, such as I said before, laptops being left on trains. It's amazing how often that happens. And links to SharePoint and other sharing platforms being made available to the wrong person without encryption. Also, you've got to think about the more rudimentary data leaks that you see. So conversations in public about something sensitive that could be listened to by the wrong person. Again, we often are brought in to advise on that sort of disclosure. Jamie.
So business email compromises account for the second largest amount of volume that Kennedy's team has seen recently. Effectively, what a business email compromise is if someone's mailbox or a business's mailbox has been penetrated by threat actors, usually through a vulnerability in their security system or through a phishing email. What the threat actors then do is kind of traverse through the mailbox, and they're basically looking for correspondence with a party or another employee where there's a payment that's going to be processed in the near future. And what they look to do is intercept that and then basically provide false bank details so that the payment that is being processed gets diverted from the intended party away to the fraudster's bank account. I've dealt with claims, many of these claims in the range of $15,000 all the way up to close to $1 million. And it can be an admin assistant's email that's been intercepted, or I've also dealt with up to a CEO, so it ranges the full business. Another risk with these is on the data side, which the Kennedy's team will talk about, is if a threat actor has been in a mailbox, they've obviously got exposure to all the data, personal data, private company data that's within that mailbox, and there'll be some regulatory requirements off the back of that with the new laws coming in, which we'll touch on later. And then the kind of highest volume that the Kennedy's team are seeing at the moment, I think around 56% is ransomware. As always said, it's a hot topic at the moment. Again, like with the business email compromise, threat actors tend to get into the system via vulnerability, via phishing email, and then once they're in, they work their way through the system, harvesting as much data as they can, harvesting passwords so they can access all sorts of drives, shared folders, etc. And they encrypt basically any data that they think is worthwhile to the company that they may want to release, and would be willing to pay a amount of money for it. So if they might capture all of a company's client data with which the company can't operate, they then leave a ransom demand saying, give us $100,000 or else we'll release this data to the dark web. It's then up to the business and this group basically in the negotiations as to whether that ransom demand will get paid. And we'll touch on ransomware attacks in a fair bit more detail later on. Paul will touch on that.
Okay, so we're going to just put a spotlight on ransomware. I think this is of interest to most people because of the nature of these sort of attacks. So the last 12 months or so have been a bit of a roller coaster ride. So in the early part of 2022, we saw a dip in the amount of ransomware attacks which were out in the market. And we traced that those figures to be largely linked on the geopolitical issues between Russia and Ukraine, which caused a downturn in the number of attacks. Into the end of 2022, we saw a brief spike, but then into this year, we've seen a huge spike again. And our team has been extremely busy the world over dealing with ransomware. And we're really seeing this spike move into the Middle East arena now. In terms of the top sectors that are targeted, as you see on the screen, the professional services is often a real source of attack for threat actors. Manufacturing, education, healthcare are usually in those top four. But this is a table that moves around quite regularly, depending upon which threat actors are most active at any particular time in the market. The top three ransomware groups that we're seeing at the moment are called Lockbits 3.0. They're extremely popular at the moment, unpopular, I should say, with organisations. And we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail in a moment. Other key groups that we're seeing are called Blackbuster and Royal Ransomware. All of these groups are increasingly sophisticated, increasingly aggressive, and they're really implementing some tactics. So we've seen a shift in tactics of ransomware groups over the past 2 to 3 years. So initially, the classic ransomware attack involved encryption of a network, encryption of data. And then that led to what's called double extortion, which is where they not only encrypt the data, but also exfiltrate it. They steal some data which is sensitive, or they believe is sensitive to the company at the same time. It's all trying to leverage their position in the negotiation process. And then that's led to a new wave of attacks with an added layer of pressure. So we now see ransomware groups also starting distributed denial of service attacks in the aftermath of an incident, so DDoS attacks. Just when the company thinks they might be starting to recover, they'll start peppering them with DDoS attacks to try and bring them back to the table to negotiate. And the other thing that we see, which is very unfortunate and very difficult to deal with as a company, is the human side of these attacks. So we see the ransomware, the ransom groups contacting CEOs, contacting directors of companies directly, as well as their employees, sometimes their customers, to try and push them to pay the ransom demand. And they'll be very, very aggressive in these tactics. So just to shine more of a light on Lockbit, this is a very, very interesting criminal organisation, and they're very sophisticated in what they do. The way in which Lockbit and many other ransomware groups operate is that they operate as a ransomware as a service model. So what that means is that they have a central executive team that essentially loan out their tooling to affiliates who they will interview, and they will sell their tooling, usually for a fee of a few $1,000s, and it will be those affiliates that go out and carry out the attacks. They will charge the executive team a commission for the companies that they are able to attack and successfully negotiate a ransom payment with. And as I say, they are becoming increasingly aggressive. They use sophisticated tooling. So, for example, they use a tool called Cobalt Strike, which is often used by legitimate penetration testers to understand the security weaknesses in a company for legitimate reasons. But the ransomware, the ransom threat actors will use that for their own purposes in order to leverage privilege rights in an organization, in order to discover where data sits across the network, in order to laterally move around the network and ultimately cause as much damage as they possibly can to that company. They're making a lot of money at these groups. The FBI have estimated that they've already made about $100 million, and Lockbit 3.0, who's only been active for a matter of months, really, since about the middle of last year. But I think that figure is a huge underestimation, because the FBI only see a very small percentage of the figures. So I think hopefully that gives you some context to the discussion now. So I'll hand back to Kelsey.
Thank you, Ollie, and thank you, Jamie and Ollie, for that informative presentation, which I think helps to set the scene for today's discussion. So you mentioned a lot about threat actors in the presentation, and I was just wondering if perhaps we could share what types of companies threat actors usually target, and perhaps Jamie, you could give us your views on that.
Yeah, I mean the bottom line really is everyone, all businesses, all size, all sectors. We've dealt with claims, incidents from one person, sole traders whose emails have been compromised, all the way up to large corporates with millions of dollars invested into their IT security. So really nobody is safe from these threat actors, unfortunately. In terms of who specifically would they target, looking at an industry level, some of the actors that Ollie mentioned there, like the Royal Ransomware Group, they target, tend to target anyway, transport and manufacturing companies, whereas Lockbit, for instance, are a bit more widespread in the sense that they target all varieties of SMEs and much larger companies as well. Medusa, who is another threat actor that wasn't mentioned there. Actually, I did play with them over the weekend, but they tend to be focusing on kind of large power and energy companies. So every business is at risk. Some of these threat actor groups do have preferences as to the industry, but I hope that helps.
Thank you, Jamie. Rob, do you have anything to add on that?
To be honest, I think Jamie hit the nail on the head that nobody is safe. As an insurer, we're in sort of a privileged position to see more of an overview of the landscape. So we see from all sectors, we see energy, we see financial institutions, healthcare, education, retail, we see claims from across all these different classes. There's also no distinguishing between whether a threat actor attacks an SME or a large corporate. There's huge amounts of claims in the SME space, so much so that many insurers at the moment are not offering an insurance solution for an SME proposition. This is due to the profitability associated with it, because while the limits and the exposure could be quite small, the cost of rectifying these is still 7 figures. In addition, also these claims don't tend to get the headlines because they're for small business owners, and that can actually cause a problem with an education process. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you get the sort of the big fish hunters, the ones who want the large global corporate clients that have a large tax surfaces, and so the payday will be higher, the PR will be better for the threat actors, as if they're seen to get into these, it increases the demand for ransom as a service, for any socio-economic what's one of the better words?
It's okay, thank you.
Agenda. There we
Agenda, you got it in the end. Thank you for that, Rob. And Ollie mentioned during the presentation that these threat actors who carry out cyber attacks are very sophisticated. And I was just wondering, Amal, if you could expand on exactly how sophisticated their operations are.
Okay, there is sometimes a misconception that threat actors are teenagers in their hoodies behind the screens, but we need to think of threat groups as business operations. From our experience, we see that threat actors are becoming more and more sophisticated. We've seen evidence that threat groups are having a setup similar to legitimate business. Also they have offices and they have targets, they have supervisors, and some threat groups offer to their members paid holidays, and some they do have maternity leave as well.
Thank you, Amal. Ollie, do you have anything to add from your experience?
Yeah, I just really echo what Amal said, that these are sophisticated operations. I don't know whether anyone has heard of the group called Conti, one of the most prolific ransomware groups of the past 2 years or so. They're no longer in existence, but there was famously a leak of their data last year as a result of some infighting between the key threat actors. That resulted in a leak of thousands of messages. And by reviewing these messages, the security industry was able to understand a lot more about how Conti and other threat groups operate. And it was quite clear from these messages that they really do act like a tech company. They have a management team, they have a R&D department, a HR team, They have a business development team even. And they're very, very sophisticated. They know what they're doing, and it's increasing in terms of sophistication on a day-by-day basis.
Thanks, Ollie. But given these threat actors are criminals, how can we trust their word when they ask for a request for a ransom payment? How can we rely on their word in your experience?
It's a good question, and I think if you think of them like a tech company, then they've got a reputation to uphold. As you saw from the slide earlier, Lockbit have a brand. They have a brand identity, and they want to protect that. It sounds crazy, but it's true. And so when you're dealing with them, there's an element of bizarrely when you're dealing with a criminal operation here, which is granted, but in a bizarre way, because of the reputation that they have to uphold, then there is a strange element of trust in that they don't want to ruin their reputation by not holding their word. If you pay them and then they don't delete the data, or you pay them and they still post all your data on the dark web. So it's a kind of paradox in a way that you're dealing with criminals and you can still trust them, but it's bizarrely true. The one thing I would say is that we would always, of course, advise our clients that there is an incredible amount of risk in dealing with a criminal organisation, and that we have seen instances of data still appearing on the dark web, even though a ransom demand has been paid, and so we always will say that any company who enters into a negotiation with a ransom group and ultimately pays them should always implement some form of dark web monitoring to keep a track of that data potentially surfacing online. We always ask the threat actors for some evidential proof of data deletion as well. So sometimes they will provide us with a screenshot of a log file that they say proves deletion. We've even seen a video of them, a screen grab video of them deleting the data, adding it to the recycle bin of their computers. So there are ways in which you can perhaps give yourself an element of reassurance that they've stuck to their word, but of course you never really know.
Thank you, Ollie. Rob, I know you have experience in this area too, so I'd just like to get your views on this topic. How trustworthy do you consider threat actors to be?
I mean, as we've all touched on already, these threat actors are sophisticated, large organisations now with, for want of a better word, a clear business plan. They are aiming to get in, get the ransom and get out. And if they are seen to be, getting the ransom and then releasing the information anyway, this will be a PR issue, because as a result, the next time there's a large ransom by this threat actor, the company are going to be less likely to pay on the back of the PR. So there's the sort of almost business risk, which is possible. But as far as we can trust them, I think we have to act in best faith, as we do with all businesses. Business deals go wrong in the normal world as well as the criminal world. So to be honest, we've employed the panel here and some other expert vendors to help the client negotiate, to try and mitigate the risk as much as possible, and to try and get the best result for everyone involved.
Thanks, Rob. Jamie, do you have anything to add on this point?
Just on that, really, the bit around trusting the criminals, like I said, odd thing to do, but something that the panel vendors and the experts can do in their communications or negotiations with a threat actor is ascertain if they are indeed one of these threat actor groups, like I said, Lockbit or Medusa, or if in fact they can identify if they're potentially an imposter. So when I say imposter, it might just be a kid in his garage pretending to be Lockbit, and they're able to identify that through some of the communications, in which case they're a bit more unpredictable. So through our expertise and our experience, the team can identify basically when to push, when not. They know when to have the conversations and likely who they're having them with.
Thanks, Jamie. And in terms of tactics tactics that we as kind of incident response team can use in order to kind of against these threat actors to assist companies. What would you say, Amal, are the best tactics that we can use?
It's not necessarily the case to in contacting the threat actor to pay the money, but we often contact them to stall some time for the forensics to be carried out and the backups to be assessed. So we usually recommend that we discuss the tactics before engaging with threat actors.
Thanks, Amal. Jamie, perhaps you would like to provide your views on this as well.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to early notification, early engagement. If there is an incident, let the right people know as quickly as possible, i.e. come through these channels, and the expert group can be on calls within a matter of hours, and then you're in the position where you can decide the best course of action, whether that is communicating with them, whether it's not, whether it's holding back, getting PR involved to release a statement. It's basically just a case of getting the right people involved and up to date as quickly as possible and taking it from there.
Thanks, Jamie. And we know that obviously when a company gets hit by a cyber attack and the threat actor uses a ransomware, that they're going to request a ransom payment from the company. Rob, in your view, what proportion of companies usually pay that ransom?
I mean, that's quite difficult to tell. I mean, there has been over the last couple of years, I'd say, a downward trend in those who have paid the ransom. This could be for multiple reasons. As Ollie touched on, there's the geopolitical situation. There's also the fact that ransomware has been in the spotlight for a couple of years now. And as insurers, we've made it a lot harder to ascertain the right level of ransomware insurance unless the company has the correct systems in place. So maybe there's a higher barrier to entry, which is preventing some of the ransoms from being in a position to be paid. But to be honest, if at the end of the day, it's a business decision, as we keep mentioning, in conjunction with the incident response team, the lawyers, the sanctions check, the expert negotiators, and the IT forensic team, who are all on our panel and all best in class. If it is the right decision, we can reimburse the client for the ransom payment as long as it adheres to the policy terms and conditions.
Thanks, Rob. And Amal, I'll turn to you next regarding payment of ransoms. Is that an option for companies in the Middle East, or is there anything legally that prohibits companies in the Middle East from paying ransoms?
The current laws, they don't prohibit paying ransom, but regulators usually recommend not paying them. If the threat group is connected to a terrorist group, then some rules and regulations may apply on these cases, but it's kind of difficult to link them, and you need to support it with strong evidence. So also there are international sanctions, which Ollie may talk about now.
Yeah, it's not just the Middle East regulations that we need to think about here. There are global implications potentially if a ransom is paid. So the key sanctions list that we always need to check is the OFAC sanctions list, which is the US Treasury's list of banned entities that you cannot pay, otherwise you'll face criminal or civil sanctions potentially. So we always need to check that list before any payment is made, and OFAC basically acts as world police on this. So they've got complete extraterritorial effect of those regulations, and so we always advise any company that's going to potentially pay a criminal group to check that register as a first port of call before any payment is made.
And Ollie, how do you see threat actors changing in the future, and also how do you see AI operation? How do you think AI will impact threat actors' operations?
Yes, it's a great question, and it's a discussion that I've had very, very regularly recently. The impact of AI on cyber. So, in a nutshell, it's going to make the threat actors a lot better at what they do. It's improving the security industry for the better, but it's also improving the threat actors tool set. So, as an example here, one of the key routes for threat actors to understand weaknesses in business systems is to look at the Microsoft patching that comes out every second Tuesday of the month. So we often see that the threats that are prevalent at any particular time are leveraged as a result of that patching, because what they do is reverse engineer the patch that they see having come out and figure out what the weaknesses are in companies that haven't patched. With AI, we're seeing the threat actors doing this even more quickly, even more efficiently. So I think it's going to speed things up, and we just, as an industry, need to make sure that we're keeping ahead of the game with it, really.
Thanks, Ollie. And Jamie, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I guess the kind of first thing that a lot of people think of when you say AI is ChatGPT at the moment, and a way in which we've discussed that can heavily impact the threat actors is their ability to use that to write scripts, which will in turn generate effectively weaponry or malicious files, malicious codes, which can then help them infiltrate, or once they have penetrated businesses' systems, do the damage. So it's kind of like Ollie said, it's AI is fantastic, it's great, but it can be used the wrong way, and I dare say that will be what happens in the future. Also, in terms of brute force attacks, so when we're talking about brute force, historically that's a manual, not fully manual, but a task of trying to crack someone's password by just repeated attempts, trial and error. With the help of AI, threat actors will be able to do that in seconds. They can crack someone's passwords regardless of how complex to degree, within seconds, minutes. So it's just basically another kind of string to their bow, unfortunately.
Thanks, Jamie. And I think we're all aware that the data protection landscape in the Middle East has changed rapidly over the last 12 months, including the introduction of the Oman data protection law. And I was wondering, Amal, if you could provide us with a brief overview of how the landscape has developed in the Middle East over the last 12 months.
Data privacy laws in the Middle East have been evolving in the past 12 months. Several countries implemented and revised their data protection laws. Qatar was the first country in the GCC to introduce the data protection law in 2016, and it was followed by Bahrain data protection law in 2018. The UAE and KSA introduced their data protection laws in 2021, followed by Oman last year, which came into force in February this year. We expect that in the next 12 months, the regulations of the executive regulations of KSA, UAE, and Oman to be issued, so that we can have a clear guideline on the notification requirements and other procedures.
Thanks, Amal. And Jamie, do you have any views to add on how you've seen the data protection landscape in the Middle East evolve?
As Amal just touched on there, the obligations of businesses to report incidents or data breaches is becoming a lot stricter. What that effectively means is more businesses will have to report on these incidents, which means in turn they're more likely to report it to their insurance, which means more notifications, more incidents, and they'll look to the panel of experts to help deal with those, whether it's the forensic experts to help work out exactly what data has been exfiltrated, what parts of the system have been exposed, and then of course the engagement of lawyers such as Kennedy's to help notify the authorities of that.
Thank you, Jamie. Amal, coming back to you on the data protection law, and especially with the recent implementation of the Oman data protection law. Could you perhaps share with us the current requirements in terms of who a company would need to tell in the event of a cyber breach and any time limits involved?
We usually recommend contacting lawyers to get early legal advice. And if there are any contractual obligations, maybe you should contact your partners. There are time limits for notifications, which are set by the regulators. And if there is any contract, then maybe in the contract as well. In terms of the legal requirements under the Omani data protection law, you must notify the regulator, which is Ministry of Transport, and the data subjects when there is an incident. But the time limit is not stated, but it's referring to the executive regulations, which are not issued yet. So we don't have a clear guidance on the time limit for Oman. But for example, Kuwait and Bahrain, they have 72 hours from becoming aware of the cyber incident. So they need to notify the data subject and regulator. And we need to notify the partners, as I said, because there are some commercial data, not only personal data. So, yeah.
Thanks, Amal. Ollie, perhaps you could give us your views from a global perspective.
Yeah, so for any organisation that has a global footprint, it's not just the laws and regulations of where that company has its HQ that we need to be worried about. It's a global issue if you have an incident. So we're regularly advising companies on the steps that they need to take in terms of notifying regulators across the world. And so that could be either where their employees are based or where their customers are based. And if you think about the example that I mentioned earlier, that the jewellery company, they were based in the UK, but they had customers based in over 100 countries. When we spoke to the exec team there, they didn't even realise they were shipping to so many countries. I think they'd even bought a website template which had an automated list of countries, and they were just shipping out there. And so what that meant was that when there was a breach, we had to comply with or consider the regulations in over 100 countries, which was very, very expensive to do. So it can be global as an issue when you have an incident, even if you're a company just based in one jurisdiction. And obviously, you've got the GDPR to think about if you're shipping your products or you're dealing with customers or have employees in European countries. That's a 72-hour time limit. But we're seeing more and more onerous limits come into play. So as an example of that, the Indian CERT team have recently brought in a regulation where you need to notify them within 6 hours of an incident, which obviously puts any company under a huge amount of pressure in the immediate aftermath of identifying an incident. So this is an evolving space where we're seeing new rules and regulations coming out on a monthly basis at the moment. So it's really important that you see it from a global perspective.
Thanks, Ollie. And you mentioned the word compliance there. So what is the current position in relation to fines and penalties that you're seeing on a global perspective? And we'll come to you, Amal, on a local perspective shortly. In relation to non-compliance of reporting a breach or compliance with the data protection law?
Yeah, sure. So there's been a huge increase in fines that have been imposed by regulators over the past 12 months or so. Particularly across Europe and into the US, we've seen regulators fine companies multi-millions of pounds. You may have seen that Meta was fined 1.2 billion euros in the past few weeks, which is an incredible amount of money. But I think that tells a story, because regulators are taking this very, very seriously, and I'm sure that other regulators will follow in the coming months in terms of clamping down on non-compliance with regulations.
Thanks, Ollie. And Amal, in terms of the local laws, what do they say in relation to non-compliance in the event of a cyber breach?
I think the main jurisdiction we care about now is Oman. So under the Omani data protection law, there is a fine of a minimum 500 riyals to a maximum 500,000 riyals to be imposed in case of violation of the law. So it's not a small amount. KSA has a more serious penalty of imprisonment for 2 years plus 3 million Saudi riyals as well. So different countries have different fines and penalties.
Thanks, Amal. We're told by a lot of people that cyber insurance is very, very important for a company to have, but companies have a lot of things to be spending their money on. So, Rob, I would like to direct this question to you. Why should companies prioritize purchasing cyber insurance? What is in it for them?
I mean, thank you for giving me the platform to sell my product. But, yeah, nice, easy question here. So, in today's society, it's fantastic for so many reasons. We're so interconnected. We can do business internationally at a touch of a button from a beach in Bali. We have manufacturing plants that can produce thousands upon thousands of products on a daily basis. We have hospitals with all the online systems who can send your medical records across if you're injured in a different country. But with the evolution of technology and the increased use of internet within our business, this inherently increases our exposure. And so more than ever, it's more important for companies to realize that there is a huge cyber risk involved with doing business. Not just a cyber risk, but a reputational risk as well. And we, as insurers, we work very long and hard to put together a team of expert vendors on the panel for incident response, whether it be legal, whether it be the incident manager, IT forensics, PR, consultants, forensic accountants, and even expert negotiators. So basically what you're buying with cyber, which is very different to any other insurance product that I've been involved in, is it's peace of mind with balance sheet protection, but also with risk improvements. So we're a team here. We're here to help you together and to help with that risk transfer. Because in the cyber world, it's not really attritional losses, small losses that are going to burn your balance sheet slowly. These are large, severe, big monetary values, and that are really going to hurt your organization or how your organization goes forward.
Thanks, Rob. And Jamie, do you have anything to add from an incident management perspective?
Yeah, I guess an element that we've not talked about just yet is business interruption. And by that, what I mean is, if a company suffers a cyber attack, how that attack impacts the day-to-day operations of their business, i.e. servicing their products, servicing their customers. If you think of, say, an online retailer, someone like Amazon, who we all know, if their systems are down, I'm talking their procurement system, their online payment platform, their logistical system, so they can't carry out orders, they might go hours, days, even weeks, depending on the size of the extent of the attack, without being able to fulfill their sales. With that, naturally, you'd expect their sales will go down. So the policy is there to protect you from lost revenue as well. There's also the flip side in terms of excess costs that have been incurred as a result of the attack. So staff overtime, obviously the cost of the expert vendors we've touched on, but also if you need to go out and buy more hardware or replacement laptops, whatever it may be, to see you through that difficult period to get your company back up to full operational. The business interruption cover effectively looks to bring your gross profit back up to where it should have been pre-attack.
Thanks, Jamie. And Ollie, perhaps you could provide your views from a legal perspective.
Yeah, sure. So obviously there's the upfront costs of dealing with an incident in terms of those vendors, and insurance provides instant access to a team of specialists when you need them most. But there's also the other side of things, which is the long tail risk. So we often see claims being brought further down the line after a cyber incident has has burned out, suddenly you'll find yourself faced with a claim from a customer or a partner as a result of downtime that they faced, or perhaps it's data that you've compromised that belongs to that customer. So that's a trend that we're really seeing in the UK, in the US, across the EMEA, and unfortunately it's a sting in the tail for a lot of companies who feel that they've just about got over a cyber incident and then they have to face some long tail litigation. So again, cyber insurance will usually cover the costs of dealing with claims which are associated with the incident itself.
Thanks, Ollie. So we've talked about the benefits of cyber insurance and what it does cover, but obviously we know that insurance policies tend to include some exclusions. So Rob, what type of things are not covered under a cyber insurance policy?
You're really not letting me off easy, are you? So yeah, I think as with all insurance policies, there are a list of exclusions, whether it be, as we touched upon, the sanctions area. I think the main exclusion that you're referring to is the property damage exclusion, which has been in the media. This isn't picked up by cyber, quite rightly, and it should be discussed with your broker or your insurer of your property or risk. There are some markets who do a property damage buyback available at an AP, but it is not widely subscribed to in the market at this moment in time.
Thanks, Rob. And if a company wants to come to you and buy cyber insurance, what types of things would make them a good underwriting risk in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I could, as I mentioned, I could go through a laundry list of defense systems that I'd expect them to have in place with multi-factor authentication, good access controls, good segregation of data. But to be honest, you can tailor an insurance policy for different levels of insured. My personal approach is basically looking for a customer who is looking for a partnership. And these can be two different types of insured, generally speaking. They can be the larger organizations who are very proud of the systems and frameworks that they have in place and almost want to show you that just so they can get discounts or better coverage, which is perfectly acceptable, and we're here to do that. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is the more SME type clients or medium-sized risks who are at the start of their cybersecurity journey, and they don't know exactly the route that they need to go to get insurance or to protect themselves fully, and that's what we're here for. We as I've mentioned, we have a large number of vendors on our panel. We're here to help and start a relationship and move them forward in the right direction. And at Mosaic, we have a new partnership with Safe Security, who can do inside-out scans for the insured. It doesn't have to be disclosed with insurers unless they want to, and it can make risk improvement suggestions. And so it's really becoming more like an old-fashioned construction policy where there's risk improvement suggestions and there are credits given if these are made in a certain time frame. And so when we have our new primary wording, which came out this week, a little bit of a PR stunt here, when we're involved with a client on a personal basis, via a broker, we have real benefit from that when we get them in from the start of their journey and we can plan together.
Thanks, Rob. Amal, what kind of things could a company do in advance of a breach, so before they are hit by a cyber attack, in order to keep costs down if an attack happens?
I believe companies shall perform pre-incident simulations with their lawyers and IT providers, and maybe train and educate their employees. I'm aware of one of the companies that routinely sends phishing emails to their employees to refresh their awareness of this type of incidents.
Thanks, Amal. And Jamie, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think much with cyber as a whole is it's still very much an education piece. So the more businesses can be talking to their employees about the risks associated with it and to stay vigilant and send round information packs on the types of risks and how you can fall short of it, the better. Like Amal touched on, simple things like phishing email scams are very much still one of the main ways these threat actors get into organisations. Simply by clicking on the link or opening a file is often enough to give these threat actors access to a business's systems. So it's just bringing that to the forefront of every employee's mind. Not, we've dealt with matters where it's everyone up from an admin assistant all the way up to a CEO who's clicked on these and basically given life to the attack, if you like. So yeah, education is a key point there.
Thanks, Jamie. Ollie, would you like to share your perspective?
Yeah, so we regularly discuss this sort of topic with our clients and our partners, and I think the consensus is that it's all about layering of security. So think of it like an onion, in that you look at the middle and you've got your data, and around that you've got your applications, and then you've got your network, and then you've got your perimeter. And if you take care of all of those things individually, you've got a layered approach, and that's the best form of defense. In addition to that, it's really important that you see it not just as a static thing, it's an ongoing issue that you need to take care of, you need to nurture, you need to make sure you're aware of the ongoing data landscapes, the changes in threat groups, the changes in trends. And there's a really famous quote by a security analyst called Brian Krebs, you may have heard of. And he said that if you, as a security team in any organization, if you feel that you see light at the end of the tunnel, it's not a way out, it's an oncoming train. And so you need to think of it like that, in that as soon as you feel like you might be settling down as a security team or an internal IT team, you're doing something wrong. There's always something to do, there's always a new piece of software or EDR solution or a piece of training that you could offer to improve your security posture.
Thanks, Ollie. So we've talked a lot about what companies can do to plan for a cyber attack. And Jamie, I was wondering if you could share your views on what happens when companies haven't planned appropriate for an incident.
So often what you'll find is, and Rob will attest this, is the best businesses to write risk for are those that have a plan in place, i.e. those that have been proactive, have gone out, they've maybe met the vendors before, they've built on those relationships. If you're a business that hasn't done that homework, yes, the vendor panel's still there to help, of course, but you maybe waste a bit of time. And I think the question was around what happens if you've not planned, and it ultimately comes down to time. These incidents are very much time critical. The longer these threat actors are in your systems, the more damage they can do. So it basically just kind of prolongs the attack, prolongs the damage they can do, whether that's business interruption, direct financial losses, or paying away funds, or it just means they can encrypt another server. It's just going to cause further damage down the line, unfortunately. So the way to mitigate that is get those relationships built in place beforehand. If you have IT consultants, reach out to them, say, what do we do when we have an attack? If you have lawyers, do the same. That's the best way to kind of prepare yourself really for these incidents.
Thanks, Jamie. And yeah, Rob, can we get your views on this?
Yeah, I was jumping in there. And I think, from an insurer's perspective, to be quite frank, this could also be a barrier to entry to get cyber insurance, because as we all know, the cyber insurance proposal forms are very long and cumbersome and frustrating for people to fill in. But we do ask about business continuity plans, incident response plans, disaster recovery plans, because we want to know that you're thinking about this and you're moving towards the right end goal. I've got a quote, probably from someone not as famous as Ollie, but from my granddad, who was always like, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And that is true as it is, especially in cyber insurance. So I'd always advise sitting down with your broker pre or post bind and your insurer, get their instant response team, their claims team all together on a call. You can thrash out any potential logistical issues, any questions about how the process will happen once a claim comes in, because as Jamie mentioned, time is of the essence. Time is money, and in cyber, time goes very quickly.
Thanks, Rob. Ollie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so we regularly sit down with organisations and we talk through a scenario of a ransom attack with them. So we simulate it with them. And when we do that, and then they go on to have an incident, the feedback we get is that they found it extremely beneficial to their ultimate response to the incident they suffered. And so looking at some practicalities and some of the things that we see, it's aspects like understanding who your breach response team is going to be if you suffer an incident. So you might have an organization that has 10 people, you might have an organization that has 10,000 people, but you always need to know who are going to be the key decision makers when you're faced with that crisis situation. And so if you can plan that in advance, you're halfway there. So you might have someone from your HR team, because undoubtedly you'll have issues with your employee records potentially. You need someone from your ops team because your operations in your factory may be down, for example. So you need someone who understands how the inner workings of your factory floor operates. So you need a decision maker there that can make those critical decisions. You need someone from the board. You might need one of your investors. If you have those key people who can make decisions round the table when you have that incident, it makes it much quicker and much easier to deal with. Otherwise, everyone's running around in circles, not knowing who to turn to, not knowing who can make a decision. And any minute of delay in those critical moments can have a big impact.
Thanks, Ollie. And do you have any examples of how not planning properly for an incident could it potentially impact negatively a company's reputation?
Yeah, so we had a very interesting example actually of an organisation that we were dealing with that didn't have any sort of breach response plan in place, any sort of communications plan. And when they had an incident, the CEO of that company filmed himself on his phone, and he explained to the camera that the unimaginable had happened. The most devastating thing that the company has ever happened to it has happened. All their data has been lost. All of their customers' data has been lost. They're really sorry about it, and they don't know what to do. And in not so many words, he posted that video on their website. So any of their customers who navigated to that website saw that video, and it was the most damaging thing they could have done. And about 2 years down the line, as of today's date, we are still receiving claims against that organisation due to the poor communications plan that they had or they didn't have in place. So it was critical in that circumstance that they paused. They should have paused. They should have collected their thoughts and relied on advisors externally to put together a communications plan for them. But they rushed something out and it had devastating impact, unfortunately.
Thanks for that example, Ollie. Rob, in your experience, do you have any examples of how not planning properly can impact a company's reputation?
I've actually got the opposite. So just to switch on its head, we've had numerous notifications over the years where there's been a plan in place. It hasn't always gone to plan, but through the expert vendors, the PR consultants, the legal advice, it's actually mitigated any risk or any loss, and the notifications have been closed at zero because of the advice that was given. And if anything, it's actually enhanced the reputation of clients, just on how they dealt with it, how they responded. It can lead to increased brand loyalty. It can open up increased revenues as well.
Thanks, Rob. And Ollie, in terms of planning for an incident and getting companies prepared for data protection laws and data regulations that are coming into force, especially in Oman, I know there's something that Kennedy's do, which is carry out a data privacy review. I'm just wondering if you could explain what that entails and why it's important to carry out a data privacy review before a company, gets hit by a cyber attack.
Yeah, so carrying out a data privacy review is essentially a top-to-bottom audit of all the organisational measures that your company has in place for the processing of data. So that might be looking at your privacy policy and looking at your contracts, perhaps. If you have a website, looking at your cookie policy. there are a lot of documents that are required now by law, which any organisation needs to have. And again, it's not just looking at what the regulations are like here in Oman, but it's looking at international regulations as well, particularly if you're dealing with customers or partners which are based overseas. But there's a real practical issue here, which is that we've had a lot of experience of regulators getting sidetracked after an incident. So we dealt with an incident affecting a gym in the UK, a chain of gymnasiums, and they suffered a business email compromise. And it was a fairly innocuous incident, but the regulator went onto their website and quickly realised that they didn't have a privacy policy in place. And so then they started an investigation about that and about their wider document management issues, and they were more interested in that rather than the business email compromise cyber incident itself. So it is really important to get these things right, because just when you're not expecting it, you end up under the microscope of a regulator.
Thanks for that, Ollie. Amal, perhaps you could share your views on this topic as well.
Can you repeat this?
Yeah, sorry. So the question was, why is it important for companies to carry out a data privacy review before a breach happens?
Because it allows the companies to assess their privacy practices. So these will lead to mitigating the risks to the companies before turning into a breach. So it's to see if there are any gaps in the privacy practices they have.
Thank you. And I think we'll stay with you, Amal, just because we have a local law question next. And I would just like if you could explain exactly who the Middle East data protection laws apply to and whether they are currently enforceable or is there a grace period in place?
Okay, so data protection laws applies to individuals in the jurisdictions, companies in the jurisdiction or outside the jurisdiction. Sometimes companies outside the jurisdiction, but they process data inside the jurisdiction and practice their activities inside the jurisdiction. Most of the GCC data protection laws are into force, but only the KSA law is still not into force. It will come into force in September 2023 this year. There are executive regulations for the data protection law in the UAE, which is not issued yet. Once it's issued, within 6 months, the companies need to prepare and get ready for the law. I think that's.
Thank you.
And I think just from an insurance perspective, like globally, we've seen a large increase in data privacy and data misuse claims. And now that the Middle East is increasing regulations around this, underwriters are going to want to understand how companies hold their data, if they understand how they manage it and the responsibilities associated with it. And so there could be additional questions requested from underwriters in the Middle East, because previously this wasn't as much as a concern, but now it's coming to the forefront.
Thanks, Rob. So we're almost out of time now. So I would like to just end with one final question to our panelists, and perhaps we could start with Ollie. What is the main message you would like our audience to take away from today's discussion?
So I think obviously it's all in the planning and the preparation for any company. So understanding where your data sits at the start. What is your risk? What is your risk profile as a company? I think it's really important that you all take that away. And then planning for the inevitable, making sure that you have that plan in place. As I said earlier, who are the key personnel that are going to deal with an incident when it happens? Have you got insurance in place? Have you got vendors that can help you? Because the last thing you want to be doing if you have an incident is trying to find someone to help you. Because if you go into Google and you search ransomware vendors, you may stumble across someone, but it may not be right for your business. So finding someone who is appropriate for your size of your organization, has local expertise, and can help you when the time is needed, and then that's probably the key message that I could give.
So following on from Ollie kind of talking about the investment of time there, I would say that the investment of finances into it as well. Cyber risks aren't going anywhere; they're only going to get more and more prevalent. So it's worth at this stage investing some cash effectively into it, whether that's through speaking with your insurer, your broker about putting you in contact with some IT security firms, or going out with existing consultants, and they can work with you to, like Ollie said, identify your exposures, and then kind of build solutions suitable for your business, whether that's full antivirus, firewall, etc., security systems in place, and that lends itself onto the discussions you have with your insurers about the risk.
Great, you guys basically answered it for me. No, the key is ongoing education. I mean, it's an evolving landscape. It's something that we should all be asking questions of. Insurers should be asked questions of. We should be held accountable, as should be the expert panel. We're here to help you. So at the end of the day, just be loud, ask the question. And then also, as it is such a specialist, ever-changing subject, that I would recommend engaging with a specialist broker who knows the markets that are suitable for you, that knows the insurers, has relationships with the insurers, can actually portray your business in the best possible light to the insurers so that you can get the largest limit, the widest coverage possible.
I think from my point of view, the first thing is understanding the legal landscape in your country to be in, to make sure that you're in compliance with the law. The second thing is ensuring that your house is in order. The data protection law in Oman mandates the appointment of a data protection officer. So you need to make sure that you appoint a data protection officer, securing data, training your employees, as well as reviewing the contracts and policies, because as they said that this field is evolving very fast. So, yeah.
Thank you, panelists. And sadly, we are out of time for today's discussion, but we hope you found that helpful. And we will be here. If you have any questions at all on cyber, then feel free to just approach Ollie, Jamie, Rob, or Amal, and we'll be here now for the next 30, 40 minutes. And you feel free to ask any questions you have.